Hi everyone, this is our presentation on Apple. It's going to be presented by myself, Kaylee, Chris, Dom, Vinny, and Sarah for our managerial environment class for fall 2020, Professor Rivas. The critical elements of our presentation are going to be as follows: Section 1, background info; Section 2, trends; Section 3, ethics; Section 4, decision making; Section 5, impact; Section 6, outcomes; and 7, conclusion.
All right, so a bit on the background. Apple is amongst the big tech companies, which are all leaders in the information technology industry. These include the likes of Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, also known as Google. When it comes to their products and offerings, I'm pretty sure everyone's fully aware of what Apple products are most popular. And just to name a few, that includes the iPhone and the iPad. So for the target shareholders, this is split between the internal and external categories. For internal, the focus is on the individual shareholders and institutional shareholders. And for the external, this includes the customers, competitors, and the government. So Apple's mission statement is to deliver the highest quality of products and services to consumers. This is pretty self-explanatory, so I won't expand too much on this. So now on to the values and the vision. For Apple's values, they acknowledge and welcome the differences amongst their consumers and employees and prioritize education, privacy, security, and the environment. And just to expand a little bit on this, there are numerous articles on Apple giving back to communities by donating Apple products to Boys and Girls Clubs, schools, and other organizations, as well as developing programs to teach programming. And in regards to privacy, Apple continues to create a rift between the corporation and government offices for prioritizing the privacy of customers and not releasing personal information. This is known as the FBI Apple encryption dispute and has made many headlines over the past few years. As for valuing the environment, Apple prides themselves on being carbon neutral, using recycled and renewable materials, and clean energy.
The first section that we're going to talk about is the internal factors that affect the business environment. The first one is the Porter's value chain, which focuses on systems and is a collection of activities that creates a greater value for customers. As you can see, it's separated into two different activities: support activities and primary activities, which are general for every single business. They're practically the same. So as you can see, primary activities consist of marketing and sales, outbound logistics, operations, inbound, where support activities can be like human resources or any kind of really office duty. The other internal factor is the SWOT analysis, which you can see specifically for Apple below. Positive things that they have internally going on is they have strengths with their liquidity position, as well as product innovation, and some of their weaknesses include lawsuits, which you'll hear about later on in the presentation. Some opportunities that they have is they have expansion opportunities as well as new initiatives, and some threats include foreign exchange rates and increase of intense competition. Some external factors are the acronym PESTLE or STEEPLE, however you want to remember that. The first one is political. So with that, it's how the government affects the economy and the extent that they intervene. Economic, it deals with growth, interest rates, exchange rates, inflation, anything that deals with that with the business. Social involve the shared beliefs and attributes for the population, growth, age distribution, health consciousness, and career aptitudes. For T, it's technological. So that can be new ways of producing or distributing goods, and then services or communicating with target markets. Environmental is going to be the increased importance of scarcity of resources. So with this, there's like water scarcities. I know they had like Pepsi Cola had an issue with that a while ago. Legal, health and safety. So with that, it can be equal opportunity, advertising standards, consumer rights and laws. Ethical, it can be ethical principles and moral ethical problems. And that's like the main one that we're going to be focused on is the ethical aspect of STEEPLE. And then for Porter's 5 forces, that's another external factor that deals with business environment. So with that, it's a tool for understanding the competitiveness of your business environment, and it's used for identifying your strategy and potential profitability. You can see a chart down there that really outlines it, but the main 5 forces in Porter's 5 forces are the competitive rivalry, supplier power, buyer power, and threat of substitution, as well as threat of new entry. Description and impact. So with that, a real trend that's been going on is with corporate social responsibility. Corporate activism is a huge one. So basically it's split off into 2 different things. For corporate activism, you can either be reactive or proactive in how you respond to things, or with proactive before it even happens. One of the reactive things that people tend to point out with corporate social responsibility that's happened in this very famous case is the Rana Plaza in 2013 that ended up killing a bunch of people who were working in a sweatshop factory. And Apple has also changed the way that they react. So they used to be reactive, and now they started taking more proactive approaches, which is really good for their company. A few years ago, they were outed to be producing at China's Foxconn, and responded by, which was a sweatshop, and they responded by releasing a groundbreaking annual supply chain report. So with that, they really went in depth with their supply chain and who their suppliers were and the different aspects of that. And the report was highly transparent and created a first mover advantage in supply chain corporate activism. So that's one way that they became more proactive, by becoming reactive at first. And along with that, Tim Cook, for many of you who don't know, he's in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide right now, is Apple's CEO. And he's the first openly gay CEO of major public companies. He has taken on controversial religion freedom laws because of this, and his reasoning being that the legislation, it's not that the legislation will harm Apple's commercial activities, the reason why he's taking on these controversial religious freedom laws, but that it goes against the company's value system. The next impact is business ethics. So with that, one of the things that's kind of blowing up right now is whistleblower protection laws. So with that, whistleblowers are receiving more incentives to hold corporations responsible. And with that, the whistleblower compliance culture, the era brings about compliance in many different forms that were previously looked down upon. So with Apple specifically, they need to work on their acceptance of criticism and listening to their employees. Earlier this year, there was an incident with a Thomas Liboniak, who was a contractor for Apple's SIS grading project, which took snippets of people's conversations with Siri and transcribed them to improve the Smart Assist accuracy. But with that, Liboniak heard himself listening in on people's recordings unwillingly. So this included medical discussions, as well as drug deals, and even people having sex. And the last section is sustainability. So for those of you who don't know what that was, the UN released 17 different goals in the year 2015 that they want to achieve, hopefully by 2030. So with this, it has a huge impact on how corporations conduct businesses, because now they're being more regulated and watched because they want to achieve all these goals. Some of the main ones that we're looking at specifically is goal number 9, 11, and 12. So goal number 9 specifically talks about funding projects that provide basic infrastructure. So with Apple entering countries that help them produce and piece together their products, although you can look up their supply chain, as I previously mentioned, and really go in deep with that, Apple still should ideally be contributing to the countries that they're entering to fund a basic infrastructure for them and create sustainable communities that would also be in compliance with Goal 11. Goal 12 was a responsible consumption pattern, which can include recycling paper, plastics, glass, and aluminum from old electronics, which can be helpful contributing through changing they can also be helpful through changing energy consumption patterns in their factories, such as changing to energy efficient bulbs that reduce light waste, such as LEDs.
All right, so next we'll talk about ethical issues for Apple. Apple sits at over $2 trillion for a market cap across its global landscape. A mega cap company such as Apple has arguably the hardest time dealing with ethical/regulatory issues internationally. Their deals and cash on hand tend to be worth more than many small developing countries entirely, causing unnecessary pressure on these emerging countries to make profitable deals with Apple. Apple must address not only these regulations and culture in its host countries, but also numerous other countries who differ across laws, political views on ethics, and CSR. If Apple slips up across any of the 140 countries it sells its products or services, they could easily lose that business demographic within the area and negatively affect their brand image. For example, in 2019, Apple was named a defendant in a case involving multiple families from the Democratic Republic of Congo that accused Apple of unlawful use of child labor. This adversely affects the credibility of their supply chain and its management. Their corporate strategy to undo their mistake here could be to focus on improving their human rights stances for employees of Apple and other large companies across the globe. We saw this with the Coke and Pepsi case that improving the communities around their facilities should be at the forefront of their brand development in new or non-host countries. This responsibility rests with their executives to provide meaningful decisions that benefit not only their brand image, but also the countries that they do business. Possible regulatory issues for Apple will rely on the operating government's laws, employment laws, and tax regulations, as they tend to differ greatly between various countries. If we worked at Apple, we could approach these issues with a dedicated plan of action to establish company rules specifically for the country the employees operate within, as to not break any unusual government laws. This could be coupled with an overarching guideline for all Apple workers as a basis for human rights laws as outlined in their host country's CSR expectations. And as stated before, there may not be clear guidelines to in emerging countries' regulations or ethical practices, meaning Apple must focus on aligning their values with these underdeveloped countries. Apple's values are inclusion and differentiation, meaning that they must respect these emerging countries and communities as they seek to serve everyone and become a world leader. Apple can focus on holistic values to prepare themselves for these ethical and regulatory issues, effectively giving them a competitive advantage against their competitors. This advantage stems from their ability to treat their corporate social responsibility with more weight than their peers, as well as handling ethical matters with more importance and avoid the societal disasters other international companies have dealt with in the past. If Apple can perform these actions successfully, then they will indubitably increase their brand image and spur further development backed by customer satisfaction. Aligning the corporate structure, brand development, and choices of upper-level management across 140 countries is a tall order. However, with the actions listed above, Apple can achieve a positive sustainability effect throughout its operations. As we touched on earlier, Apple must focus on not only the environmental impact that they have on communities, but also the human capital that they use in their facilities. Apple's executives can impact their cultural framework by using the guidelines for international CSR and further optimize their global sustainability across all networks. For example, if Apple were to push towards a program that incentivizes employees to get a university degree while working and award them for furthering their education, it sets a positive impact on their community. Programs that work toward bettering human stakeholders like employees or customers are credible ways Apple could use their new framework to positively affect their brand and their customers. Along with that are environmental aspects that make sure they cut out unnecessary harmful emissions or waste that could negatively affect the communities around them for generations to come. This leads me to my next point about being forward-thinking and understanding constructive plans like the ones mentioned above must be enacted for the long term. It is one of the key aspects of sustainability to make sure these affirmative actions are here to stay for generations to come in order to reap the most potential benefits as not only for a company, but as a planet. All in all, if Apple follows a well-structured triple bottom line approach, they can align with their corporate strategy, brand development, and decision-making abilities to deal with the business and ethical regulatory issues to achieve respectable sustainability.
Although Apple is a very popular brand, multiple instances of lawsuits and settlements have affected the legitimacy of Apple's ethics. The first is that they broke consumer protection laws. In 2016, Apple completely downplayed widespread iPhone battery problems, and the new iOS version was causing older phones to shut down unexpectedly. In addition to a cash settlement, they had to provide information to consumers about battery health in all of the updates that they have. Also, working class injuries and damages in 2019, the International Rights Advocates filed a lawsuit against Apple because seeking damages and compensation for death and serious injury of children who were working in the cobalt mines in Apple's supply chain. For environmental ethics, Apple received the worst, or one of the worst ratings in ethical consumer for their report in 2019. It included sections of using potentially hazardous chemicals. And even though Apple gave a statement saying and explaining why they did, it still wasn't enough. Also, Apple owns subsidiaries in Ireland, the Netherlands, and Singapore. That seems to create some sort of tax avoidance, and Apple also gave a statement on that, but it wasn't strong enough to affect their decision when giving a bad rating. Also, corruption within a company hurts the brand, and it's super costly as well. Currently, Apple's security chief is actually in court right now because of a bribe to a sheriff's office in Santa Clara, California. For the integrity to remain in good standing, administrative action should be taken within a company. Corporate culture is kind of built on ethical principles of taking care of communities, so ethics is super important. Society believes that businesses strive with equal attributes from the following ethical values and principles: meeting the expectations of shareholders as well as creating revenue. So it's kind of all linked in together, and if one of those is lacking, then the whole company won't succeed. And big brands get leeway when it comes to economic, financial, and environmental ethics because a lot of people rely on them. With smaller businesses, it's not as common just because they kind of have to make sure that every aspect of their company is working correctly. But big brands don't always feel the need to make sure everything is running smoothly in that aspect. And consumers want to know that they're not aiding in the downfall of others, focusing on the consumers and the communities they come from, rather than revenue, can promote an ethical company as well as a sustainable one too. Corruption is common among small businesses, or small and big brands. Responding to issues within can make or break a company. Business bribery is common among all brands, and it's estimated that $1 trillion goes into bribery each year. Harvard Business School actually found that when companies use bribery more, they succeed more. But not only reputation comes into play, but it's also really costly to deal with, the aftermath of corruption. You have to go through lawsuits and all of that, and it will take away from using that money that using the revenue from like products and services, it'll take away from that and go into things that don't really need to be gone into, like bribery. Corruption is avoidable if stronger policies and procedures are in place to consistently surveillance the company's internal and external communication sources, like emails and stuff. The bribery that went on with the within Apple could have been avoidable, but there just wasn't enough communication surveillance. And Apple should have better communication policies regarding employees and higher authority. There are employees that probably knew about what was going on and didn't come forward because they thought that they wouldn't be heard or no one would believe them. So speaking up is hard in a large company, especially with a variety of statuses, and there just has to be better communication policies within that. Costs that go towards corruption cleanup could be going to other things. Also, risk assessing programs could make corruption avoidable by, again, like communication policies and procedures just to survey the whole company so that if something is coming to light that's riskful, that could be taken care of pretty fast. Surveillance communication and risk assessment will improve reputation, and it will improve the costs associated with corruption, and it will make the company more credible. It'll also protect the company. Apple should be as ethical as it can be, especially being such a large corporation. Again, a lot of people rely on them, so not being ethical doesn't really help them in any way. Programs and ethical decisions on corruption will not have a major cost to stakeholders as long as they're upheld and consistent. And creating a safe and corruption-free community and company is important, just to protect the company in general.
Okay, so for my section, I'm talking about the impact on Apple's ethical and regulatory issues and how they affect communities around them and their own business global environment. An example of this can be Apple being a defendant in a human rights / child labor case in 2019 that occurred in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So in the DRC, they are known for the mining of the cobalt that is used by top tech companies around the world, including Apple. The DRC produces 60% of the world's supply of cobalt, which is used to produce lithium-ion batteries that are used to power electric cars, laptops, and smartphones. In 2019, Apple was a defendant in a case that involved 14 families from the Congo area that accused Apple of unlawful use of child labor. So children in these families were severely injured or tragically passed away at the mines where the cobalt was being mined. The families are seeking damages for forced labor and further compensation for unjust enrichment, negligent supervision, and intentional infliction of emotional stress. This lawsuit that was filed argues that Apple had specific knowledge that the cobalt was being mined for their products and it could be linked to child labor. Apple, working for the mining companies operating in the DRC, allowed them to gain significant financial advantages from the illegal mining of cobalt by children. This removal of cobalt from the DRC is being linked to corruption, human rights abuses, and child labor. So, to talk about the impact that it has on the community of the DRC, many children and families were impacted by the cruelness of the mining operation that Apple was associated with. Children suffer from long hours, illegitimate pay, horrible working conditions, and intentional emotional stress. Stats say that nearly 40,000 children work for the mining operation, and unbelievably, children started working for this operation at the age of 4. Some children who worked for the mining operation suffered from serious injury or tragically passed away from the treatment that they were of the way they were being treated. According to anti-slavery economist Siddharth Kara, in field trips to mines in the DRC, she witnessed staggering inequality, pain, and misery at the bottom of the supply chain that we all are connected to through these devices every day. Families that are included in this case were greatly impacted by the loss of their loved ones due to this operation. The people of the Congo have the right to be upset, and the families of the suffering children have the right to file a lawsuit against Apple. So how does this case impact Apple's global environment? Global environment consists of the international interactions out of a company's control that influences how a business operates. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there are little government standards, and these low standards give MNCs like Apple the opportunity or temptation to lower or reject standards to save money. Being a defendant of a lawsuit that is accusing you of being associated with an operation that is taking away the human rights of their workers and using child labor is an awful look for Apple. Apple having specific knowledge and continuing to obtain these resources from the mining operation shows they are playing a part in it. So question lingers, how does a lawsuit that includes child labor allegations and human rights allegations impact Apple's global environment? Apple is known as being one of the top tech companies in the world. They distribute their products and services to 140 countries that have stable environments. Apple's brand image could be tarnished from this lawsuit. It could steer consumers and companies away from purchasing their products and services. Could also break relationships with countries that purchase their products and services. So overall, it can really hurt their brand image and how people, just regular customers and consumers, look at them, and also how countries and other companies that they're associated with and working with can view them as well. So countries may not want Apple operating or being associated with suppliers in their country because of these allegations. So then moving on, Apple using corporate social responsibility and the pestle analysis to be ethically better. So there's a lot of definitions of corporate social responsibility, but this one defines as the obligation of decision makers to take actions which protect and improve welfare of society along with their own interests. When a foreign company like Apple is associated with a domestic operation, that company, Apple, still must abide by the rules of corporate social responsibility and be associated with an operation that respects its employees. If a company intends to use a supplier from another country, that company needs to be socially accountable to ensure that their workers are at age and are being treated correctly. If we investigate the pestle analysis, this case has a lot to do with the third E of the term that was just added to the acronym, which stands for ethical factors. Ethical factors are important as they address responsibilities regarding the corporate and social actions. So Apple should use these ethical factors when associating itself with its own suppliers, giving human rights to its employees, which everybody should be given no matter what, legitimate pay, workable hours, having employees of age, and giving charitable contributions to communities that their suppliers are at. And I really think this is an important one because these communities are allowing Apple to move in or use suppliers to gain resources for their own products. So I think Apple should be, giving back to these communities and funding these lower end communities like the Congo, for example, and trying to make them a better place, make it a better place, that community a better place, and just work for the greater good of everybody. But Apple has been trying to improve its brand image and its global environment to show that they genuinely care about not only its employees, but the employees that work for its suppliers and help build a great brand image.
All right, so outcomes. So what was the outcome of the Democratic Republic of Congo Apple situation? So according to a spokesperson in Apple in 2019, Apple is deeply committed to the responsible sourcing of materials, and if a refiner is unable or unwilling to meet our standards, they will be removed from the supply chain. So Apple's resolve was to remove cobalt refiners who did not meet their standards for hiring. Apple was one of the many other big tech companies to obtain cobalt for their products like Microsoft, Tesla, and Dell, and they all claim to have raised their standards and better their practices, but attest the issue to be a supply chain issue and doesn't think that the matter should reflect badly on the company.
So internal and external factors affect the business environment and that they're set the tone for how the business is run. This was mentioned in the beginning of the presentation in the first few slides. Also, trends in corporate social responsibility, ethics, and sustainability also play major roles in how a company runs, such as their standards and how they adjust the ways in which they conduct business and operate in order to comply with these trends and standards that are set by other corporations.
Like I stated earlier, MNCs like Apple need to be mindful of CSR when they're searching for suppliers for their products or even when they're going into foreign countries to operate. Picking the wrong suppliers who do not stand with your code of ethics could extremely affect their global business environment. Being in business with operations that care for their employees and the communities around them is extremely important. And, you know, they have to respect their employees to put out their products. So, you know, they want to be associated with operations that have positive environments for their employees, and that will push them to work their best, and also giving them the incentives they deserve. And then just being associated with these operations will also help improve brand images and further help them, sell products and services to other countries and other businesses around the world.
And like we talked about earlier in the ethics section, lawsuits can make or break a company, whether they are environmental, economic, or political. Promoting a socially responsible company is important in proving to customers that the company is ethical, as well as just actions to prevent social uproar should be taken within the company.
And corruption occurs in larger corporation, but prevention could include surveilling communications as well as risk assessments.